Well, hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, we're talking about my 5 favorite shop-made jigs. Well, since the beginning of the show back in 2013, we have actually made 20 different jigs here in the shop. Some of them for woodworking, some for not. We've made bread slicing jigs. We have made jigs for drilling out balls. We have made all kinds of different types of jigs. But through it all, I thought that I would go through and pick out my 5 top jigs. Now, the 20 jigs that were made, that does not even include things like making jig knobs and that sort of thing. Those videos are separate, but we have made 20 individuals. And if you're not sure how to find them, you just got to search on the channel, type jigs in the search, and you will hopefully find that. So guys, without further ado, let's get into the list of my top 5 favorite jigs. Now, back in July of 2024, I brought you guys this. One of the smallest jigs we've made here on the show, and what this is a small parts routing jig. Now, made initially as kind of like a series where we made dice and ended up laser engraving them. If you remember, we made yoga dice, but it has a whole bunch of other uses. Any time that you can, or you find a need, I should say, to route smaller pieces, this jig here is the one that is going to hold it for you so that you can keep these guys here away from the router bit. Now, this jig was made out of things just on hand. Scrap plywood. I had wing nuts and bolts to go with them. That hold down clamp, that toggle clamp, all of these things were things that I kind of had lying around the shop anyway, and I just utilized them for the jig. That's one of the things that makes it a great addition to this list. Not only was it inexpensive to make, but it was made quickly with things on hand, and it provides not only repeatability, but a great level of safety to protect your fingers from the spinning bit. Now, while you may say that, well, you know, that doesn't suit my purposes, it might be too small, the hold downs don't work for me, the wing nuts are not where I would like them to be. Guys, the concept was given there in the show and I demonstrated how to make this jig, but that doesn't mean that you have to follow it to the letter. One of the things that makes it here on the list today is the ease with which you can modify it to suit your needs. It is just a concept, and I turned that concept into something which suited my needs at the time, making the dice. But if that doesn't suit your needs, if your pieces are a little larger, if they're a little taller, a little wider, a little deeper, whatever your needs are, take the concepts that I provide and make them your own. That's what this show is about. Either way, it's a fantastic little jig, both for repeatability and for safety, and it sure as heck belongs here at number 5. Well, it was back in December of 2018. I actually produced a 2-part series on making a circle cutting jig, but this one was a circle cutting jig for the bandsaw. Now, during that stretch of time, I actually ended up making several styles of circle cutting jigs, some for the router, some for the handheld router, etc. And I demonstrated all of those here on the show. Some were simple, some were more involved. But the one for the bandsaw was the most involved. And the reason for that was its adjustability. Now, there was a sliding mechanism which allowed the center pivot pin to be moved. And with a ruler scale installed and some clear acrylic to kind of protect it, it gave a window where you could slide that pin and make a variety of circles, pretty much unlimited here, depending on how long you made the scale for your adjustments. Now, guys, one of the great things about this particular circle jig was the fact that it fit my Rikon bandsaw perfectly. It was custom made to work with that table, with those miter slots, with the external bar fence on the front for the existing fence of the bandsaw. The entire jig was customized for that saw. But not only did I customize it on the show, but I showed you what measurements to take in order to customize it for your own saw. So not only is this a great jig for me, but by showing you how to take the measurements and what to do, I've made it so it can be a good jig for you. Guys, regardless of the other circle jigs that I've made, whether it be for the handheld routers or for the bandsaw, this one is my go-to. It does a clean job. It does a great job. It's always perfect. It always looks good. The circles are what I set them to be. If I want an 18-inch circle and I set that center pivot point to be halfway at 9 inches, it cuts me an 18-inch circle. I don't have to worry about it. The jig has positive stops that holds it perfectly in place against the fence and against the, or in the miter slot, I should say, so that there's no deviations. Nothing changes. Once it's set in place there, it cuts the circle the same every single time. And just like our small parts router jig, that provides repeatability. And repeatability is the key purpose of any jig. The key purpose of jigs is to make things repeatable. In other words, if you want a 19 or an 18-inch circle, you don't want to have to fuss around too much. You want to be able to grab that jig and cut an 18-inch circle. If you want another 18-inch circle the next week, grab the jig and cut an 18-inch circle. You don't want variance. You want that to cut an 18-inch circle. That's the repeatability of the jig. But what it also provides is the safety of it. And by this thing fitting firmly and custom fitting into the miter slots and against the edge of the table of the bandsaw, it provides the safety of not having to hold the jig in place. Frees up both of your hands to concentrate on turning that stock to be able to cut your circle. So while it was a bit of work and a two-part series, and probably way more talking during that series than what there should have been, this is a fantastic jig. And if you're in the market for a circle cutting jig for your bandsaw, honest to goodness, you will not be disappointed with this one. You should at least check out the video and give it a whirl for yourself. Well, it was in February of 2021 that I brought you this one. And what this is my table saw spline cutting jig. Once again, one of the things that makes it hit the list is A, repeatability, and B, the safety features of this thing. What this one does is the whole jig rides along the fence. And by riding on the fence, again, it frees up your hands so you don't have to hold things. The other reason you don't have to hold things is the integrated shop-made toggle clamps. And while my video on making those probably left a bit to be desired, it was a little confusing. I'm actually considering refilming that and reproducing that show to kind of bring down the technical aspect a little bit and make it more accessible to you guys. But either way, those shop-made toggle clamps hold everything so securely in place that there's no need to use your hands to hold it. So you can concentrate 100% on using your hands to control and guide the jig through the table saw. Because the splines, the distance on your piece, the spline's distance is set by the fence, instant repeatability. Nothing's moving. You're only rotating your piece to each corner. You get the exact same setting every single time. The drawback to that is if you make a mistake in your settings, you get the same mistake every single time. So as always, you want to be careful with setup. The height of the table saw blade controls the depth of your splines. So as long as you set it right and lock it down and don't move it, again, you've got repeatability. Guys, this here also integrates a tried, true, and tested handle, and that is the handle for a handsaw. It was traced out from a handsaw. I made a template and then was able to utilize it in the jig. This has been tested over time as comfortable, usable. It works. You get great grip, great control. It's not something I made up. I took something that has been used for longer than I've been on this earth and put it into my jig. So that's another aspect that makes this jig so great. The fact that it's taking the old with the new and joining them together. Either way, guys, if you're looking to add splines to your project, whether it be for boxes or whether it be for frames, which this was originally designed for, it's a great jig. The only thing that's different about this jig, if you want to use it for frames, picture frames, then you would use the shop-made toggles. But they were designed and placed on there with a quick release with thumb screws to pull off. And then if you want to use it to, say, put splines into a box, well, then you'll need to clamp it in place with external clamps. Not that big of a deal. It still works, and it still works well. So give this one a try. Coming in at number 3, my table saw spline cutting jig. Well, back in October of 2015 was a 2-part series to make this. Guys, quite possibly one of the handiest jigs I think I've ever made. And I really toyed between number 1 or number 2 with this one, mainly because of its versatility. This thing, if you've ever bought dowels from a big box store, they are horrible, absolutely horrible. I don't know what type of measuring devices the manufacturing companies are using to make these commercially available dowels, but I have never seen one that is the right size. Never. I mean, I get some from Lee Valley, the micro dowels, and they are tiny, and those are pretty much bang on every time, but they're also more expensive. They're a little higher end. But once you start getting into things like 1/4 inch, 3/8, 5/16, you know, whatever, they are absolutely horrible. And in most cases, they're either way too big or way too small. So I got frustrated with that. And I ended up making this jig. And this jig, using a straight bit with your router table and your fence and a cordless drill with some square blanks cut on the table saw, you can make your own custom dowels to any size that you want, and they're perfect every single time. And if they're not perfect, it's because you've set it up wrong. So there was a 2-part series. I made this, and while the series was kind of extensive, there was a lot to do. It is a very simple jig that has replaceable blocks in the middle, and each block represents a size of blank to use and the size of dowel that will exit out the other side. Why haven't we seen this jig more on the show? Well, we saw it in earlier shows. And then the problem is that I don't see it as a problem. It's a problem for the jig. It's not a problem for me. But I upgraded my router table to my Jessam system and then built the new cabinet around it. And as much as I love it, the fence is not conducive to be used with that doweling jig. The vacuum port that comes on the back, instead of being straight through like what it was with my Freud system, it is actually angled. It's tapered up. And that is the exit port for the dowels as they are made. So because of that, unfortunately, as the dowels come through, it bends the dowels up and it causes problems with putting pressure on the lower end of the dowel and causing the rays a little higher on that bit, or to misshape as they're being spun. It really causes an issue. So it's not that the jig's not great, because it is. I used it for years and I love it. I still have it. It's fantastic. The problem is that it's not compatible with my Jessam fence. I guess I could remove that vacuum port, but then what's the point of that? Because part of the vacuum port, with the way that the jig works, is that it actually sucks away all the chips that's made while making these dowels. It's kind of a dual purpose. It keeps the dowel on the exit port from spinning wildly out of control, and as well it sucks away all of the chips from basically turning the dowels. Now guys, one thing I did do is I had to modify some of them. The maple blocks that were in the middle, they started to wear. So what I did was I actually started to install steel plates on the back of those with the proper exit port hole size. And that did a couple things. It prevented the maple from burning and wearing out the back end, but it also provided like a second little burnishing exit port where it burnished those dowels and gave them a nice smooth sheen. So that was an excellent upgrade that was not actually brought into the video series. It was done much later. But either way, guys, you got to give this doweling jig a try. Having the ability to make dowels any species, any diameter, any length. You're only limited by the blank that you're putting into it. The issue that I had, I've never been able to do my own dowels less than 3/16 of an inch. I've been able to do 3/16, but you really got to go easy on those ones. It was better to make them a little larger and then sand them down by hand to get to 3/16. Just once you get to that small size, the wood is very unstable and it kind of likes to wobble, and that takes gouges out and breaks and it causes issues. But from 3/16 up to 1/2 inch, make whatever you want out of any species. If you haven't checked this one out, it's a spectacular jig. And now the moment we've all been waiting for, what is the #1 jig? Guys, June of 2024, not too long ago, brought us this, the small parts cutting jig. One of the most simple jigs using the least amount of materials, but one of the most useful jigs I think I have ever made. This one was designed by me. I made it years and years and years ago, and it was designed strictly for cutting small parts on the table saw. And then there were so many people that kept asking about it and kept asking about it. And then I showed it on a program and demonstrated its use, etc. I think it was in the Methods of Model Making or something like that. One of those shows. There's almost 1,000 episodes of the show on the channel. I have a hard time keeping track of them. But anyway, people kept asking, and I realized I have never produced a show on how to make this. And over the years of using it, there were certain things that I had always hoped were developed into it because certain problems had come from using it. And I realized through use what improvements it could use. So I was able to implement those improvements and bring them to the show for an easy build and a great jig. Now, why did this get #1 over this awesome dowel making jig? Guys, the one reason and one reason only is the amount of use it gets. I make dowels from time to time when I need them. Depending on the project that I'm doing out here, that small parts cutting jig, in combination with my miter fence, it gets used more than any jig in this shop. Any jig, bar none. That thing hangs right beside my table saw. It's quick to grab and to use, easy to set up, completely customizable for the size of piece that you need to cut. Now with the new hold downs, it keeps your fingers out of the way. Guys, this jig has stood the test of time with me. It has been with me for many, many years in the shop. Different varieties, different variations of the jig. This one with hold downs and a longer exit port for longer material. Other ones were just basic, simple fences. Some were tall, some were short, some were wide, some were fat. They've changed over the years. This jig has evolved as my skill set has improved or as my needs have changed. And due to the fact that it has evolved with me, due to the fact that it has been here for years and years and years in here, keeping my fingers safe. It is one of the jigs that I will attribute and give credit to the fact that I still have all 10 of my digits. That jig has helped to keep me safe when cutting smaller parts. And people say, wow, you cut that on the table saw? How did you do that on the table saw? The small parts cutting jig, guys. The link will be down below. Check it out. Make one for your shop because this thing is awesome and it deserves to be at number 1. And there you have it. My top 5 shop-made jigs. Guys, all of these jigs, whether they suit you or they don't suit you, all of these jigs have the 2 things in common. They have the ability for repeatability in cuts or in routings or whatever, and they have some form of safety feature attached with them that keeps your fingers safe, your hands safe. So when you take those 2 individual elements, repeatability and safety, and you put them and incorporate them into a jig in your shop, it makes for one heck of an amazing jig. So when you're designing your own jigs or when you're building your own, you want to take that into consideration. Now, as I said at the beginning of the show, over the years here on this program, this is our 12th year, I think, I have produced 20 individual jigs here on the show. Everything from bread cutting, we even did our own finger jointing jig, shop-made finger jointing. We've done all kinds of jigs. I said at the beginning, you know what, they're searchable, you can do this. I'm going to go one step better. Down in the comments below, or sorry, in the description of the video, I'm going to put a link to all 20 of those jig videos. So if you're interested in any of them, this can be your resource. You can just come here and check out the links. They'll all be there for the taking and for the viewing. So you want to check those out. This has been a great show today. It's kind of given me the chance to look at these jigs and think, how can I change that? And I tell you, that router table doweling jig, I really want to upgrade that, and I want to upgrade it for the show. And I've been playing with some designs in my head as to how I can change it up. I like the concept and the procedure of using the cordless drill and running it through that straight bit. I don't think that's going to change, but what I think I need to change is the way that it runs through the machine. So I think we're going to play with that, and we're going to hopefully get a new version of that jig on the show soon. Either way, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you're going to check out some of these jigs because, honest to goodness, some of them are absolutely fantastic. Guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in this week. I want to thank the viewer who gave me the idea for my top 5 jig show, and that would be my wife. That was actually her idea. She said, hey, why not do this show? I thought, it could be good. Why not? Let's do that. So I want to thank her for giving me that idea. Guys, if you haven't already, if you found any part of this show interesting or entertaining, why not like and subscribe to the channel? Guys, we've got an amazing audience base here, and I'm hoping that you're going to consider becoming a part of that. Once again, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed the content. I hope you're going to give some of these jigs a try for yourself. I hope you're going to check out the links down below to all 20 of the jigs and maybe a few bonus videos in there as well. But more importantly, guys, I hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another Alternative Tuesdays.